Good evening, I'm Cynthia Ng. Here are tonight's top stories. Thailand launches airstrikes along disputed border with Cambodia as tensions rise. And will Washington cut Europe out of Ukraine peace talks? All that and more coming up on AWANI International. Thailand has launched airstrikes along its disputed border with Cambodia after both countries accused each other of breaching a ceasefire deal reached just over a month ago. 4 Cambodian civilians and at least 1 Thai soldier have been killed in the renewed clashes, which have forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes. Both countries are blaming each other for launching the first attacks early on Monday, following weeks of rising tension. Thailand claimed Cambodian troops opened fire just after 5 in the morning, killing 1 soldier and wounding at least 4 others. Cambodia, however, disputed the Thai account. Its military says Thai forces launched the first attack at around the same time, following what it calls days of Thai provocations. This latest flare-up comes only 6 weeks after a ceasefire ended 5 days of clashes that left at least 48 people dead and forced hundreds of thousands from their homes. Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim is calling for calm as fighting flares once again between Thailand and Cambodia. He urged both sides to show what he called maximum restraint and to keep communication channels open. Anwar said ASEAN cannot afford to see long-standing disputes slip back into cycles of confrontation. He also warned that the renewed clashes risk undoing the ceasefire he helped brokered just over a month ago, presided by US President Donald Trump in Kuala Lumpur. Tensions, however, have lingered since the ceasefire deal, especially after a landmine blast last month maimed a Thai soldier. Thailand blamed Cambodia and halted the ceasefire's implementation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting European leaders in London today in a show of solidarity after US President Donald Trump publicly criticized him over a weekend of negotiations in Florida that left key issues unresolved. The talks involving American and Ukrainian negotiators failed to settle major questions on security guarantees and territorial concerns. Kiev and European allies are also increasingly worried that the U.S. proposal may favor Moscow's interests. Russia insists it is open to negotiations and accuses Ukraine and the West of blocking peace efforts. Trump, meanwhile, has publicly rebuked Zelensky, saying the Ukrainian leader had not yet reviewed the latest U.S. peace proposal. His remarks came as the Kremlin praised the Trump administration's newly released national security strategy. The White House strategy, released on Friday, criticizes the EU and warns Europe face what it calls civilizational erasure, while making clear the US is keen to establish better relations with Russia. The Kremlin called it an encouraging change of policy that largely aligns with Russian thinking. As questions mount over Washington's approach to the war in Ukraine, European allies are growing increasingly uneasy. Many worry the U.S. could either pull back support for Kyiv or try to negotiate a deal without them. Gregory B. Pauling from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington breaks down why Europe is pushing to stay at the table and why a ceasefire is still a long way off.
I think the big European fear, there was 2. One, that the U.S. would simply abandon Ukraine, and that looked like a very real threat early in the administration, particularly after the very nasty Oval Office blow-up with Zelensky. And then 2, that the U.S. would strike some kind of deal without Europe, but Europe would have to be part of the implementation. And that's what this 28-point agreement said, right? It basically put a whole bunch of demands on the Europeans, and the Europeans weren't even at the table negotiating them, which is one of the reasons it fell apart. So what the Europeans want is the U.S. to continue to provide some degree of support to Ukraine while Europe ramps up its own industrial base in order to step in and fill in more. And I want to be fair to the Europeans. They are still providing much more support to Ukraine per capita than the Americans are. and more with every passing year. So they want to be the ultimate guarantor, I think, by necessity, because they don't think that Trump will do it permanently. And then they want to be at the table. They think that it has to be, of course, Ukraine and Russia that lead the negotiations, backed up by both Europe and the US. They will not accept being cut out of those negotiations because they know that they're the ones who are going to have to ultimately provide the security guarantee for Ukraine.
With Trump's unpredictable diplomacy, Gregory also warns that a ceasefire in Ukraine is looking increasingly unlikely anytime soon.
You know, 1 minute he's mad at Zelensky, then he's Zelensky's best friend. He's mad at Putin, then he's Putin's best friend. I think what is maybe the likeliest course, but this is all, you know, again, very unpredictable, is that he keeps kind of coming at this, and then when it's too hard, he goes and does something else. You know, he comes at it with a 28-point peace plan that falls apart almost immediately, and then he goes and oversees some easier deal between the DRC and Rwanda. And maybe a month from now, he'll be back to focusing on Russia, Ukraine, but it'll still be too hard. In the meantime, you know, the Ukrainians are going to continue pounding Russian oil refineries, and the Europeans are going to continue to ramp up their military support to Ukraine, while the U.S. will continue to provide what support it can. I think anybody who thinks that a ceasefire is likely, say, in the next 6 months is probably fooling themselves.
More news coming up shortly after the break.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. China has warned the United States against external interference following the release of Washington's new national security strategy, which prioritizes military deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, including over Taiwan. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun said Beijing will defend its sovereignty and urged the U.S. to handle Taiwan with utmost prudence.
He accused Washington of backing Taiwan independence forces and warned against any attempt to resist reunification by force. The comments follow the release of the U.S. National Security Strategy, which outlines a shift toward building stronger military deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. The document was released just days after China deployed a large number of naval and Coast Guard vessels across East Asian waters in its widest maritime operation so far. Beijing says it remains willing to work with Washington to stabilize ties, but only while protecting its sovereignty, security, and development interests. Taiwan, meanwhile, has welcomed the U.S. strategy. President Lai Ching-te expressed gratitude for Washington's focus on Taiwan's security.
Japan has summoned China's ambassador after Chinese military aircraft reportedly locked radar onto Japanese fighter jets near Okinawa. The incident, which caused no damage or injuries, prompted Vice Foreign Minister Takehiro Funakoshi to call in Ambassador Wu Jianhao on Sunday to deliver a strong protest, describing the move as dangerous and highly regrettable. Tokyo said J-15 jets from China's Liaoning aircraft carrier twice locked radar onto Japanese fighters on Saturday while operating in international waters near Okinawa. Radar locks are typically linked to weapon systems, though they can also be used for search and rescue. China has rejected Japan's account, calling it inconsistent with the facts and accusing Tokyo of spreading misinformation. Beijing issued a counter-protest demanding that Japan stop what it called dangerous interference in routine Chinese military training. The confrontation follows a separate standoff last week near disputed islands in the East China Sea. China's trade surplus has now exceeded $1 trillion for the first time, according to new figures released by Beijing. Although shipments to the United States fall sharply, strong demand from other major markets pushes the overall surplus higher.
The surplus provided important support for an economy navigating strained relations with key trading partners. The resilience of exports has also helped offset pressure from the prolonged property debt crisis and weak domestic spending. In November, exports rose 5.9% year-on-year, reversing a modest decline in October. Shipments to the United States, however, fell by 28.6% to $33.8 billion. This November rebound lifted the trade surplus for the first 11 months of the year to $1.08 trillion. Analysts noted that the surplus has already surpassed last year's total and is likely to widen further in the year ahead.
Hong Kong saw a near record low turnout in Sunday's Legislative Council elections, with less than 32% of voters taking part. Despite a major push to boost participation, including extended polling hours, fewer than 1.3 million people voted, slightly above the record low set in 2021. Efforts to increase turnout were overshadowed by public anger over a deadly apartment fire, raising questions about government oversight and accountability.
Since an electoral overhaul in 2021, only pro-Beijing patriots are allowed to run, and fewer seats are directly elected. Boycotting the vote has become one of the few ways Hong Kongers can safely show their dissatisfaction. The elections came amid the shadow of the Tai Po apartment fire, which killed at least 159 people. Calls for government accountability over alleged safety violations have been met with a crackdown under national security laws, and at least 3 people have reportedly been arrested for their activism.
The United Nations has launched its 2026 humanitarian appeal, requesting only half of what it says it needed as the global crises reached record levels. The UN is seeking $23 billion, the amount it says is needed to help 87 million of the world's most vulnerable people.
7 million lives.
Last year, the UN asked for $47 billion but got just $12 billion, the lowest in a decade. The target was later revised after major donors, led by the United States and followed by Germany, slashed their aid budgets. The UN still hopes to raise $33 billion to help 135 million people, but warns shortfalls are likely as countries shift money towards defense spending. The largest single appeal at $4 billion is for Gaza and the West Bank, where Israel's war has left nearly all 2.3 million residents displaced and entirely dependent on aid. Sudan is the second largest priority, followed by Syria. UN data show the United States remains the world's biggest humanitarian donor, but its contributions plunged in 2025 to $2.7 billion, down from $11 billion the year before.
U.S. President Donald Trump has raised concerns over Netflix's planned $72 billion deal to buy Warner Brothers, warning the merger could create serious competition issues in the streaming market. He added that he would be personally involved if the deal reaches the Justice Department's competition division. Speaking in Washington, Trump said the combined market share of Netflix and Warner Brothers could be a problem. He stopped short of saying whether he supports or opposes the deal, noting economists would need to assess the competition risks. The proposed deal has already drawn criticism from industry groups, including the Writers Guild, which warns that allowing Netflix to absorb a major rival could reduce content diversity, eliminate jobs, and push up prices for consumers. Netflix agreed on Friday to acquire Warner Brothers' TV, film and streaming assets, beating rivals including Comcast and Paramount. The deal would create one of the biggest media giants in decades, but now faces intense scrutiny from U.S. regulators over potential antitrust violations. That concludes AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Cynthia Ng. Thank you for watching. Good night.